Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Brian and I come bearing gifts today. If you're part of a men's group, or if you lead groups of men, we got a little something special in store for you today. That's because we're sharing a little bit of our secret sauce of what goes on behind the scenes in the Great Man Masterminds. Today, he and I will be giving you step-by-step instructions to 3 of our most beloved exercises that we use in the Great Man Masterminds to build trust, to bond quickly, and have more than a few laughs, and maybe even a few cries, with the men in our communities. Now, quite frankly, if you lead or facilitate group experiences of any kind, like in the workplace or in your community groups, and regardless of gender, these exercises all apply. But because we run a podcast for men, we call this 3 trust building exercises for groups of men. Now, because I love you so much, I've even taken an extra hour of my time to type up all of the exercises and their instructions in painstaking detail, which you can find in the show notes, so that you can copy and paste them and take these exercises to the groups of men or the communities and teams that you lead. Don't say I never did anything for you. And to bring these exercises to life, your boy Brian and I will be demoing each of them for you to give you a flavor of what to expect. So let's rock and roll with the 3 trust building exercises for groups of men. All right, buddy, I'm testing out a potential new ritual for our show that might get the juices flowing. I used it in a recent episode that you were not able to join us for, but it was one with Keith and Brandon Mills about how to turn your pain and PTSD into your greatest creation. Let us begin with a little game of this or that. Okay? So this or that, Bri. Chicago White Sox, Chicago Cubs.
Cubs.
Silent meditation, guided meditation.
Oh, wow. I'm going silent.
Okay. Whole Foods or Trader Joe's?
Whole Foods.
When you're alone, do you find a tissue or do you pick the booger right out of your nose?
I thought that was going in a completely different direction. Oh, man. I would love to say tissue, but that's not true. Pick the booger.
Yeah, straight boogers. Gluten or gluten-free?
Gluten.
Good choice. Michael Singer or Eckhart Tolle?
Singer.
Correct. LeBron or MJ?
Wait, there's right or wrong answers?
All of these have right or wrong answers.
Got it. Okay. I feel like I'm 2 for 8 so far. All right. Michael Jordan. I'm a Chicago guy.
Of course you are. And the final question, chocolate chip cookies, oatmeal cookies.
Oh, wow. If I had kids, I feel like this is picking between kids. I'm going with chocolate chip only because they're more consistent, and oatmeal cookies, they vary with ingredients, flavors, taste, and you can get a really bad one, or if you get an excellent one, then it's better than the regular chocolate chip cookie. But I'm going to go with chocolate chip.
I'm amazed that you even had to explain yourself on this, because in my opinion, oatmeal cookies aren't even a cookie. They're not even dessert. Like,
because you've had the bad ones.
No, just because all oatmeal cookies are bad ones. You know how they say that like even a bad slice of pizza is still pretty good? I feel the opposite way about oatmeal cookies. Even a great oatmeal cookie is still a bad cookie on the spectrum of cookies.
Hey, Mom, go ahead and cook up a dozen for Dominic, and we'll see if he changes his mind.
Is Mrs. Stacy a cookie chef?
Oh, yeah. She's amazing.
Okay, I'm down for that. And if she wants to throw some chocolate chips in the oatmeal cookie, that would raise
we can do that.
Okay. All right, man. Well, that may be a little game that we play. Just like I said, it kind of gets the juices flowing before we start diving into the topic of conversation, which today is about dropping 3 trust building exercises for men. Now, many of our listeners are guys who either run men's groups or they're leaders in businesses or like to lead their families in discussions where you can kind of get to know people at a different level. And this is really interesting. I've recently just gotten back on a dating app. So after 4 years, yes, I signed up for Bumble like 4 or 5 days ago.
Before you go deep, okay, so you went Bumble.
I went Bumble. Is that outdated? Should I be on Hinge or something else?
Well, I've been outdated on the dating apps now for 2 years. I feel like this used to be an area of expertise for me. What was it about Bumble that made you choose that route?
Just most available. Like in my mind, I was like, okay, Bumble. Like the last time I got anywhere near dating apps, Bumble was the one. There's this super exclusive dating app called like Raya, where like they basically take only 7% of the people who apply for it. It's kind of like, Harvard type of admittance levels. And I submitted an application there. My friend Paulina invited me and I got waitlisted. So after I went to Raya, and it's apparently like celebrities are on there, like Ben Affleck, Matthew Perry, these kinds of people. And I didn't get on that one. So I was like, okay, let's try Bumble.
Great. Okay. Fair explanation. And Whitney Wolf is amazing. So she's the CEO founder of Bumble.
You know her?
Absolute powerhouse. No, but I do not know her personally, but she is one of those mentors that I've looked at over the years.
Very cool. What I like about Bumble is like, it was made for women, by women, and therefore, women have the most control over that platform. And that's one of the other reasons why I joined there. Because if women feel safer and if women feel like they're in more control, then I feel like I might get a closer connection or a better dating experience on there. So we'll see. But the reason why I brought that up, Bri, was because one of the women who I've engaged with, she asked this really powerful question. She was like, hey, I see that you do a lot of work with men, and I'm curious, like, what do you think is one of the key traits or characteristics that people need to have in a relationship for it to be sustainable in the long term? And I'm like, you're probably asking the wrong guy because I haven't been in a very long relationship in a long time. I didn't say that, actually. I didn't want her to know that. But my response—
This breaks the number one rule of dating app questions, which is always, it's a yes, no question.
Yeah, I know.
Like how we started this podcast, those are the kind of questions that you ask on a dating app.
Great. Yeah, that's actually a great point. I should just probably put a bunch of this or that's in my response. What I said to her was like, I believe that one of the key traits is to develop an insatiable sense of curiosity. Because if you have this insatiable sense of curiosity, you'll never get bored with life. You'll never get bored with a long-term partner. Curiosity trumps judgment. It trumps anger, so if you can be curious, right, in those moments of conflict.
Love that. This is a core value. Yes.
So did I just score?
Big time, man.
Yeah, I think I scored on that one.
I think she scored, actually.
She really did. She hit a home run with this guy.
She had no idea what she was going to get from that question. And you're probably going to do a whole mastermind around this now.
Yeah, I know. Watch out, Mastermind 1.0. We're going to do a whole thing. But that question and my response, I think, was what led to wanting to do this podcast, because these 3 exercises that I'm going to be sharing with you, we've run them in the masterminds. The guys love them. And we can fall into this state of drift, where we feel like we know everything about everyone. You kind of like, I know how that person is. I know about their stories. I've heard them tell the story over and over again. These games, these exercises allow you to unpack parts of a person that they've never shared with you before, to go deeper into the feelings and emotions so that they can appear like a new person. And especially as you are running teams of men or teams of people, you get to build and establish rapport and trust super fast. Okay.
Really fast. And some of these exercises, not the 3 that we're going through today, but other exercises that we've run in the mastermind, I have brought to business. And it is a breath of fresh air in the business space. And it works. It absolutely works. So I've done this during onboardings. I've actually done it during hiring and interviews, some of these exercises. But it absolutely works. It turns out that it's a human thing, not just a setting thing.
Totally. So let's go into these games. We'll play the first one. This is you can call it a game, you can call it an exercise, but this is a fan favorite. This is one of our greatest hits that we've done in the mastermind. I usually like to do it like very early on because it's a great icebreaker. And it is called the most interesting man in the world exercise. And I love to flash that picture of the Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man in the world, who's like harpooning and, gallivanting around the world and globetrotting and
harpooning,
right? Like,
of course, the most interesting man in the world harpoons. Only interesting man harpoon anything.
Harpoons, pipes, these kinds of things. And one of the things that I like to say is we seem to give so much of our attention to other people, right? Celebrities or experts or, athletes, influencers because we think they're the most interesting people in the world. And of course, many of them live very interesting lives. But I would like to posit that everyone I'm speaking to is one of the most interesting people in the world. I just need to get curious about what their stories are and what makes them interesting. And what I've found, and Bri, like maybe you can like speak to this for a second too, but like, have you ever felt like, yeah, I'm not really that interesting. I'm kind of dull. Parts of times of your life where you're like, what's so fascinating about me?
Every single time I have to write a bio,
right,
a resume,
right.
Even when I have to do a performance review for myself, anytime I'm writing about myself, I feel that way.
You nailed it. I feel that same thing. It's for whatever reason, when it's like, hey, tell me about yourself. I almost get like, stage fright. You're at the bathroom and someone's pissing next to you and all of a sudden it just shuts off. I know how to pee, but in that moment I forget. And it's the same thing about tell me about yourself. So this game of...
Wait. What? That analogy was amazing. So you equated writing to yourself about getting a fear flaccid penis that can't pee when somebody's standing next to you. Was that the analogy?
Well, my penis is flaccid. It kind of needs to be flaccid for me to pee. Have you ever tried
That's a fair point.
peeing with an erection? It's like, did you ever see that movie with Jim Carrey? I don't know if it was like Me, Myself, and Irene. But he's peeing with a boner and he's pissing all over the bathroom and he has to grab a mirror off the wall, which he then uses to deflect the pee back into the toilet. Yes. So yes, I am flaccid but yes, I'm making the analogy of, I know exactly how to piss, but every once in a while when someone sneaks right up to you, instead of going to like the furthest urinal, stands right next to you. And then all of a sudden it just like shuts off. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Fear and pee don't go well together.
There you go. Same kind of thing happens when like, someone puts you on the spot and is like, tell me something interesting about yourself. So this game about the most interesting man in the world exercise we found has broken through that barrier. And it's all about the prompts that you give men to start to think about what makes them interesting. So here's the exercise. And I'm going to outline all of these and put them in the show notes so that you can like just basically cut and paste and use these for your men's groups or for your team building exercises. All you need to do is to say, write down 10 things that make you interesting. And then you're going to give the people, whoever you're leading, a series of prompts to get their wheels turning. And then you are going to, actually, before you do that, you're going to read your own list of 10 things that make you interesting. Okay. And then you're going to give them the prompts. I'm going to do this in reverse on this episode just because, just for the narrative's sake. So here are some of the questions that you can ask. And Bri, like maybe even just like get your wheels turning. Think about some of the places that you've traveled to. Where are the places that you've lived? How about some of the injuries you've sustained over your life? What scars do you have on your body or tattoos? Or do you have a third nipple? Something distinguishing feature of your body. How about, have you ever collected anything? What are the nicknames that you've had? What's the worst job you've ever had? Or the best job or the first job? What are your proudest achievements? Do you have a prized possession? Did you ever run away as a child and where'd you go? What's the story behind that? What would people not know by looking at you? Do you have any special skills or talents? Do you have a useless skill, or ability? What's weird about you? What's the worst date you've ever been on? Tell me about a time that you got into trouble. That's just a few of the questions. I'm going to put a bunch of those in the show notes, but those are a few of the questions that can really get people spurred on. So I'm curious for you, Bri, did anything come up?
When we did this exercise the first time, even with those prompts, I started to write down these surface level answers to those prompts. And that was good. It got me going, but I still had a bit of writer's block. Then we got together with a group of 3 guys and we read our lists. And as we expanded on the story of those moments, of those answers, I could reflect further into my life at a deeper level when I heard the stories of the other guys.
Yep.
And so doing this in group is something that's really, really powerful. And I went from being stuck at, let's say, 5 things that make me semi-interesting to I was writing off the page of all these things. And it was a ton of fun. It was a lot of fun to reflect on these different parts of me.
Totally. It's when you start to share, the popcorn kernels in the group start popping. So I'm going to share my list. And this is crucial. If you are the facilitator and you're setting this up, you need to share your own list because they need to hear like kind of a tangible example. And just start to even like, actually, as you're listening to this, when you hear my stuff, start to think about the things that are triggered in you. Okay. And Bri, anytime I share something that you want to pause me, just say stop and then go into like, ask me a probing question, because this is the other part of the exercise. As people are sharing their list and something pops up and you're like, wait a minute, I want to know more. You can dig in.
And here's an indicator. If somebody says one of their answers quietly and fast, that's the one to dig in on. Because they're like, ooh, I wrote that down. I wasn't sure I was going to share it. And let me lightly share it. And then you dig in on that, and there's always some sort of golden nugget in there.
It's like, what's the story behind that thing?
Tell me more about that.
Okay, so here are a few of things on my list. I had a job at McDonald's for 2 years as a teenager. I've never thrown a punch in my lifetime, but I've been punched in the face 3 times. So there must be something about my face that's quite punchable.
The audience is asking me to ask you to pause right now on that, but I think let's keep going.
Okay. I read books written for women. I've written 2 books with 2 fingers. I've never learned how to type. I've written both of my books as a 2-finger typer.
Is that something you want to change, or are you good with it?
At this stage, not going back. Like I'm not putting in the work to learn how to type, unless it can be done like in a weekend course. But if it's like a 6-week course, I'm pretty quick.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay.
Got it.
I've been to Australia 10 times. I've taken a 90-day radical sabbatical. I hold a high school record for receiving yards in a football game. I have won a town badminton championship. I take 2 to 3 showers a day. I once spent a night in jail.
Yep. That's a good one. Why did you go to jail?
Yeah, this is not one that I'm proud of. So I had a DUI back when I was 22, 23 years old. And here's the story behind that. Like, I was always super responsible when it came to drinking. Like, and all of my friends were all throughout high school. Like, we never drank and drove. When I got to college, for whatever reason, like the last week of my senior year, like I kind of like pushed the boundary of that, had a few drinks, would drive home like a few blocks. And then when I moved to Philadelphia, where it was a new city for myself, had my first job, didn't really know too many people, was trying to find my way. I started making some really poor decisions. And one night I got really inebriated and drove a buddy of mine home from Manayunk Brew Pub and got pulled over by a cop on like an incline, like a decline road. And when the cop told me to get out of the car, I took a step out, fell into my driver's seat, fell into the door, and he just slammed me up against the car, put the cuffs on, brought me downtown. It was the worst night of my life. I was like humiliated, ashamed, and called my parents the next day and, told them about it. And I made the decision I would never, ever do something so irresponsible again. And I never have since that point.
A lot of lessons in there.
Yeah. It's not something I think you've even talked about.
What prompted you to call your parents and tell you? Because at this point you're an adult living on your own. What was it about telling them that felt right?
It's a great question, man. Actually, and this is a really important thing I wanted to share was I didn't want to keep this secret from them. This felt like something that they needed to know. It's not like I didn't need them to get me out of jail. I did the 24 hours in there and I had my buddy pick me up. I just felt like they needed to know. I was terrified of how they were going to respond. And it was the first time, Bri, that I really, really disappointed my parents, like really disappointed them. But they showed me unconditional love. Like the first thing they showed me was care, love, and compassion. That's how they responded first. And then after that, in the coming days, they expressed their disappointment, but they shared their love with me and their sadness and like, are you okay? They really want to know if I was okay and like what had caused my condition to, for that. And that was one of the most pivotal moments for me in knowing how much my parents love me.
Thanks for sharing that, man. It's cool to see how those sort of low moments can really connect us. And it sounds like that was one of those moments for you and your parents. And that story, and this is a good example of doing this exercise, it brought up a couple more memories about how my parents did show up for me in some low moments of my life. And so I appreciate that. And I'm going to add it to my most interesting list.
Great. Awesome. See, so this is exactly how the game works. It pulled up a story that, Bri, you have never heard. You asked questions that I'd never contemplated before. And actually a new awareness that just came up as well is when a decade later, when I was in Sex Addicts Anonymous, having seen how my parents responded with such love and compassion for the DUI that happened in my early 20s, when it came time to confide about the Sex Addicts Anonymous, I knew I was safe to bring it to them. So that was a really powerful part of my healing process. And so, yeah, this game about the most interesting man in the world, especially when you have time to kind of probe into people's questions, and you could spend hours on this.
One more question on this moment, and we'll move on. Have you told your parents that before? The reflection of how you felt that unconditional love in that moment?
I absolutely told them that, like, during that experience, but it's been a long time. I think it's high time to let them know how much that meant to me. And now having, it's been, I don't know, 17, 18 years since that happened, to let them know, like, hey, do you guys realize like how much that meant to me and how much love I felt and how supported I am? Because knowing that there's really nothing I could do that would ever call into question how much they love me. And to walk through life with that kind of support is powerful.
Maybe let them know that when you tell them this again, that you appreciated that moment with them, that there's nothing else. There's nothing else on the other side that you're about to disclose. Yeah. Put them at ease.
I'm not setting you up for a big bomb.
So we've done the DUI thing. We've done the Sex Addicts Anonymous thing. And here's round 3.
Did you know that I have 12 children with my name around the globe? Okay, that's good. That's good. So that's the most interesting man in the world game. Highly recommended for forums where you're looking to like bring a group together. It's playful. It's fun. You can also go deep. And again, all the details are going to be in the show notes. Let's get into the second game. The second and third games, we're going to go into Brian. So game number 2 is one that we just introduced last night for the first time. It seemed to be a hit with our Mastermind 1.0, and it's called Making Your Movie. So this is where you get a chance to invite the participants in your group to imagine that someone has just called them up and they're interested in buying their movie rights because you're so interesting, right? Because there's something about an era in your life that they want to know about and turn into a movie. And so the first part of this exercise is inviting a man to kind of close his eyes, and you guide him through a series of questions. Again, all of these will be in the show notes. And so I led a guided meditation, got Brian and the rest of the group to breathe, and then I asked them to imagine that their movie rights are now being sold. And so the questions were, I'll invite you to explore what is the most cinematic era of your life. It could be a series of years. It could be a particular trial or tribulation that you experience. It could be a series of months or weeks. It could be something that you're going through right now. What is the most cinematic, movie-worthy era of your life? Right? It may be subtle or it may be quite dramatic. What are 2 or 3 defining moments from that era? What adversity did you face? Who are the villains of that period of time? Who are the unsung heroes? What are the plot twists? What are the biggest insights, ahas, takeaways from that cinematic era? What songs or singers or bands are on your soundtrack? And then who would narrate your movie? And you're not allowed to say Morgan Freeman because that's the obvious answer, right? So who would be the narrator of your movie? And I guided them through this very slowly, and then I brought them out. And then I posed the questions again to them and gave them 30 seconds to write down answers to each, right? So it's basically, with the meditation, with the journaling, it's about 10 minutes of prep work. And each question got about 30 seconds of journaling time. And then we broke them out into small groups of like 3 to 4, where each guy had a chance to share his story. And the listeners got to play the role of the agent, the movie agent, right? Wanting to unpack and get really curious about the dynamic elements of that story, right? To turn it into a movie. So Bri, first of all, maybe just hit on what was your experience like going through that with the other men? And then let's actually go through your story.
It was tough to identify the moment that I wanted to choose. Like what era did I want to choose? And so what I started doing was basically what are the chapters of my life and how would I break them up? So I did that first. And then once I decided on what is the era that I want to explore more in, I was able to go through the questions that you posed around defining moments, adversity, villains, heroes, etc. My experience of writing it and then hearing the stories of other guys I loved it because I was with two guys and I already knew the elements of their life that they were talking about. One guy had an adoption of a kid, and the other guy talked about the straddling of being deep into an addiction and like some of the crazy stories that went with that, and then coming out of it and becoming who he is today. And so I knew both of those elements, but I didn't know the detail. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know the villains or what they really faced in those moments and the whys behind what they did. And so I felt that I not just know them better, but like I have 1,000 questions to ask them now. And that came up in those stories. It wasn't just like, well, tell me what's next. Tell me what's next. There was some of that, but it was like, well, why did you do that? And what was that like? This person sounds like an asshole. Like, yes, they were, that kind of stuff. So it built camaraderie. It built understanding. It built curiosity. And what's better than that when getting to know someone?
Very cool. Okay. So then with that said, tell us about your movie.
Right. So I chose the era of just when I graduated college, which was 2004, and it went until about 2010. And one of the defining moments was my first job was with Accenture. And with Accenture, they've got thousands of projects that happen all over the world. And they hire hundreds of people every month. And so what they have to do is they have to add some data behind the people that they hire so they know where to take them and put them into the right projects. Make sure they have the right skill set, the right experience, and everything else. So during onboarding, they ask you to do an internal resume, a CV. And they have all these drop-down boxes of all of these experiences that you might have had. And you have to put in what the experience was, how long you've been doing it, your expertise level, and your interest. So those were the 4 elements. Now, they also said, hey, write down anything that is relevant, because the more data you have, the more likely you will be to get picked up to do a project and do something that you enjoy.
Okay.
So I said, great, I am going to nail this. I get picked up for my first project. It's at Allstate Insurance in Northbrook, Illinois, 2 months after I graduated college. So I'm sitting there and I'm feeling pretty good about myself, I got this cool job, I'm getting paid for the first time. And my boss's boss comes in and he goes, hey, Brian, can I see you outside? He literally takes me outside of the client site at Allstate, brings me outside, and he's got a thick thing of paper with him. And he said, I brought you onto this project because when I saw your resume, I knew one of 2 things was going to be true. Either 1, I was going to fire you, or 2, we would be best friends for life. And I'm not sure which one it is. And I'm like, what?
Where'd that come from?
So he took the ream of paper that he had, and he said, let me ask you a few things about your resume. And I said, sure, no problem. He said, I see that you graduated from the University of Iowa a couple months ago. Congratulations, in finance. He's like, so I look at your resume here, and it says you have experience in finance. You've been doing it for 2 years and that you enjoy it. Can you tell me more about that? I said, sure. I graduated. I had a couple internships related to finance and what? He said, oh, great. He's like, that makes a ton of sense. He's like, let me ask you about this next one. It says alcohol. It says 5 years, expert, and you enjoy it.
You put that on your resume?
And I'm like, yep, that sounds right. He's like, well, tell me about that one. And I said, well, I was a late bloomer when it came to drinking. I started maybe when I was 20, 21 when I got to college. And I think I did it pretty good. And I enjoy it. I have a good time when I drink. He's like, great, awesome. He's like, let me ask you about this next one. Gambling. And I'm like, yep, gambling. And he said, tell me about that one. I said, well, I bought a blackjack table my sophomore year of college because I needed to make money to get myself through college. So I would run blackjack. I would deal blackjack in my apartment after the bars closed, and all the bartenders would come over to our house. We'd give them free drinks, and that's how I made my money through college.
I've never heard this story. That's like Boiler Room shit right there.
But that's actually where I got the idea. I literally watched Boiler Room, and I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. And I did.
Is that lucrative? Do you make good money doing that?
The very first night, we broke even, and I did this with my roommate, and we're like, holy shit, like, what are we going to do? So I did some research and realized that on the table it was written that a dealer hits on soft 17, but if you look at the numbers, that's not good for the house.
Yeah.
And so we changed the rule. We said, we're never going to hit, the dealer's not going to hit on soft 17. We never lost again.
Nice.
And so, yes, it was lucrative.
Okay, cool. Okay, yes. So Accenture lets you put these things on your resume?
Right. So let me give you one more example.
Okay.
The guy my boss's boss goes, okay, tell me about this one. He's like, it says reading, about 16 years of experience, and you're an expert and you enjoy it. I'm like, yeah, that's right. He goes, great. Tell me about that one. I'm like, well, I don't know exactly when I started to read, but let's call it 4 or 5 years old, and I'm 21 now. So, and I read profusively. I do audiobooks, I read, and I enjoy this sort of my life. He's like, great. He's like, Brian, you realize when somebody comes out of college, usually their resume is about a half a page long. Yours is 4.5 pages. And I don't know if you know this, but we're a professional organization, and the reason we ask these questions is because we want to know what kind of industry experience you have. So, for example, alcohol isn't drinking alcohol. It's like, have you worked in the alcohol industry? Gambling is, have you worked for the companies like IGN that makes the gambling equipment? He's like, not freaking hobbies. And he's like, you know what? I think we're going to be friends for life. That was such a defining moment. That's what we're talking about right now, because that guy was Andrew Walker, who is still one of my best friends.
That's Walker?
Best man in his wedding. And you know Andrew very well. And I gained all kinds of experience there. He's helped me throughout my career so many times. And as I said, still one of my best friends. So he was definitely a defining moment and a hero in this story.
Oh my God. See, so this is why I love games like this, because I think of how much time we've spent together. Think of how closely I know you. And clearly, I know Andrew Walker very well. I've heard you guys talk about the story, your origin stories. I know you guys worked together. I went to Walker's wedding. I didn't know that this was how you guys met. I had none of these details, and this is hilarious.
And then he had to tell me, I like to wear my dress shirt 3 buttons down with my nice gold chain on it, along with cargo pants and too much cologne. So he really had to form me from straight college to get your act together, kid.
Dude, there's so many stories about you in your former days that it's like, to be able to have met that Brian, if I had a time machine and I could go back into any one of my friends' lives, I would like to know that Brian. This is so different. The way you describe yourself and the shit that you used to be into and the guy you are today, 2 totally different things, man.
Same heart, different mind, different behaviors. That can summarize it up. Let me hit one more, Dominic, in this epic part of my life. I also had read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad in college. And part of that was about real estate investing. So I decided at the same time I'm working with Andrew and Accenture that I'm going to start doing real estate investing. And so my buddy and I decide to buy some places in Chicago, and we're going to flip and rehab them. I met this real estate agent. I forget how I even found her. I think I called a loft that we wanted to rehab, and she happened to be the agent. Her name was Tracy Gola. Now, Tracy had a lot of face work done, a lot of boob work done, and was very not only attractive, but also domineering and cool and knew the city. And it didn't matter what she told me. I was listening to it.
Okay.
When it came to real estate investing. So we do our first project together, and it turns out okay. And I go back to Tracy. I'm like, hey, we're ready for round 2. Let's do round 2. Now, there was something about Tracy that gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Okay.
There was something about her. After doing a couple deals with her as our real estate agent, and of course she was introducing us to her contractors and everybody else, and so we were in this world of Tracy Gola. We had our third deal just absolutely blow up on our face, and she ended up being not a good partner. And when I reflect on that, so this is I would say Tracy's a villain in this case, so we're getting into the villain here area. One of the lessons learned that I didn't learn in that moment, and it took me another 8 years to figure out, is those heebie-jeebies, that intuition that I had about Tracy, I overrode that with logic. She knows Chicago. I've already done one deal with her, and that turned out pretty good, and everything else, but it ended up being a disaster. Because what I found out about her is she was scamming all kinds of people, and she ended up, I don't know if she ended up going to jail or not, but she got into a lot of trouble. And that feeling now, after reflecting on that and doing some work with John O'Connor on how do I listen to my intuition, is something I can now listen to in real time.
Yep.
And I don't do work with those sort of people anymore. If I have a meeting with someone like that, I go, nope, we're done. Thank you. And maybe you're just fine, but I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the big lessons learned out of that era.
Yeah. I mean, that I know that is a defining story of your life, because it took you from this place of being intellectually driven, kind of being able to be swayed by maybe someone's, air of confidence externally, but like discounting what you feel on the inside. Like maybe this person is shady. There's something off about this person, but man, they project so powerfully. So maybe I'll just listen to that. And that was a defining moment and shift in your life. And I think it's helpful, like this exercise about these movies. Like you can almost look at these eras of your life with like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's useful to go through that exercise because you could be like, here's who I was at the beginning of a movie. And here's how I transformed after going through that adversity and even like playing up who the villains are. It's a powerful exercise for you to be able to kind of see the takeaways. Last question I will have though is who narrated these parts of your movie?
Great. So Ryan Reynolds, I would love to have narrate. And as I thought about this, we have a guy in our mastermind named Ryan Eller.
Yeah, right.
And I think Ryan Eller would be an excellent voiceover for this, narrator for this, because he's got like a really cool cadence. He's a powerful dude, but also really deep. Like I like myself some Ryan Eller.
We're about to bring Ryan Eller on the podcast. We're going to do an episode about how to restore integrity after infidelity.
Oh, that's going to be amazing. I can already feel that's going to be an epic episode, and I'm excited for our audience to get to meet Ryan.
Hell yeah. Okay, so that was the game around the movie. I'm going to put all those elements in the show notes. And the last one, this is one that we've had a lot of success with, and we've been using this quite a bit in Mastermind 2.0 to go deep with each of the men in our group. And this one's called the defining moment exercise. This is how it's set up. Each man gets to pick a defining moment in his life, and he gets to speak about it, tell the story for 3 to 5 minutes maximum, right? We don't need to go into like a 20-minute story. It's a 3 to 5 minute story about some defining moment in life. Some guys choose to give like a hardship story. Other guys choose, an accomplishment, a redemptive story, anything that they consider to be a defining moment in their life. And there's really no other criteria that we need to put around it. We want to make it very, very open. Now, what happens after the end of those 3 to 5 minutes is that there are 2 guides who are chosen. You pick 1 guide or 2 guides. These are other men in the group who then lead that man who just told his story into his emotions and feelings about that defining moment. And we're going to demo this in a minute here with Brian. Okay. So you can think about the man who's sharing his story as the explorer, and then the guides are helping the explorer go deeper into his emotions and to his feelings. Here's the reason for this. Many guys are great at telling their stories from an intellectual perspective, even the more challenging stories. We've had men talk about infidelity. We've had men talk about racism. We've had men talk about getting the shit kicked out of them as kids or being bullied as kids. A lot of guys will tell the story that are quite emotional, but they'll be in their head when they're telling it. And there's still that disconnection from the emotions that haven't been processed. And it creates a distance between other men because one of the fastest ways to connect is through emotion. And if we can guide that man to getting to his emotions while he's speaking, everyone comes together very quickly. The way that we've been doing this is we create these like 45-minute containers. So a man tells a story, 3 to 5 minutes. The guides come in and then guide him deeper for the next 10 to 20 minutes. And if there's a larger group, if there are other men who are listening, those men listen for the first 10 to 20 minutes, and then they get to jump into the arena and ask curiosity-based questions to get a man deeper into his emotions and feelings. What we are not doing is giving advice. We are not trying to solve a problem. Those are the fastest ways to get a guy back into his head, the fastest ways to make a guy feel unseen or unheard. You are curiosity driven and asking guys how they feel. And you'll have a chance to see how I do that with Brian here as the last exercise.
And one more note on this, Dominic, the container has to be super tight.
Meticulous. Yeah.
For this is not something I would recommend for a corporate outing, for an onboarding of new employees, right? Like the container in which we do this exercise is within our men's group. So that's just not something I would use outside of that kind of container.
Right. Unless like you have like a really big foundation of trust with your team in a corporate setting where you've done this kind of work before. But if not, you're going to get some really emotional stuff that comes up. And if you're not equipped to handle some of the emotions and hold the space for it, this could blow up. Like I've said before, infidelity's come up, racism has come up, bullying has come up, like some of the most challenging things have come up. If you can facilitate that, then you can go massively deep with a group of guys and truncate the trust building process, the rapport building process by months. But if you don't have the expertise, you could be going into water that, that you're not ready to handle. So, Bri, let's demo this quickly for our audience. And we're not going to be able to get into the 45 minutes, but we'll do this in, say, 5 to 10. What is a defining moment story of your life?
Defining moment is the beginning of the end of my first business. We were trying to figure out what we wanted to do strategically. We had differing opinions among the co-founders. My co-founder was dragging their feet on what to do next. I needed to move forward and needed to get the investors to agree. And I decided at that moment to write an email, a truthful email, but also blowing up my co-founder in the moment. Those investors were friends and family of both of ours. So it was a highly kind of emotional group. And then after I sent that email, I also sent a text message to my co-founder stating some of why I did what I did. The outcome of that was, if we had a little tiny flame before that, I just threw gas on that thing and just blew things up from a co-founder and relationship standpoint. And then the aftermath of that, after that explosion, lasted over a year.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, man, thanks for sharing that story. This is obviously very emotionally charged. And I'm going to be bouncing in and out of our container and then also kind of narrating to our audience what we're doing here. So if you guys who are listening, if you guys could have just paid attention to, or you're aware of how Brian told this really emotionally charged story, you could tell there's a lot of emotion there. And those emotions aren't necessarily present in this moment that he's telling that story. So here's where this game or this exercise really comes into play. So Bri, thank you for sharing that. And what I'd love to invite you to do is maybe just bring your eyes to a close, because when you do that, this is where you have a chance to connect internally. When we have our eyes open, we're so taking in so much information from the outside world. And when you bring them to a close, there's much more capacity for awareness to what's going on in your inner world. If you just take a few slower breaths in and out through the nose, I'd really love to know, when you reflect back on that, sitting down to write that email where you were going to be blowing up your co-founder, writing it to the friends and family investors who you had a close personal connection with. And I imagine there was a lot of energy and emotion tied up in asking them for that money in the first place. What's coming up for you right now as you envision yourself at the keyboard typing up that email?
I was so pissed off, so angry that I thought that as co-founders we had an agreement. And when I got silence and non-movement for an extended period of time, I made up a story of what was going on, and I was furious.
Yeah. I could feel some of that fury as you're sharing that. I see your eyebrows, coming to, you're just burrowing. What's coming up for you right now? Do you feel that fury and anger right now?
I do.
Where do you feel it?
I also feel it in my face. I feel it in my shoulders. My shoulders feel heavy. The other emotion that I'm feeling is fear. There was fear that if I didn't do something, then I was going to lose everything, and that it wasn't right. There was a justification in it.
How are you experiencing that fear in your body right now?
I feel it in my stomach. I feel, as I was sitting at the keyboard, it felt like something that had to be done fast. I was being almost forced to do it. I needed some sort of action. I needed to be heard.
What's it feel like to be forced into action something so important and emotionally driven.
As I'm going back into that moment, it felt like the only way I could be heard, because I wasn't getting a response from my co-founder in that moment after repeatedly asking for movement. And from nothing, I was like, fuck it. I am going to get a response. Like, this is what's happening. Like, we're doing this on our own. Like, we're blowing this thing up and we'll see where the pieces lie. Like, it was very much I'm going to be heard. Fuck it.
Yeah, I could feel that from you right now. And the final question I'll ask you before we'll bring you back is, what did it feel like to hit send?
Phenomenal. It felt like, there it is. Everybody knows now, like, we're moving, whether they want to or not. Like, we're going. In that moment, it felt phenomenal.
I feel power coming from you right now. All right, Bri, take a deep breath in and let it go. And then just bring your eyes back to an open. Okay, so just to break that down, and I'll ask you how you're feeling in a second here, Bri, is like that was extremely truncated, right? This exercise is meant to go for like 35 or 40 minutes to go deep into the emotion, to really get nuanced, to let some of the space and time for these emotions to breathe. But we wanted to give you a little bit of a taste for it. And I definitely witnessed a difference between you telling the story kind of matter-of-factly and then you sharing from a place of emotion where I could feel those feelings of anger, right? The feelings of fear, the feeling of power when it was time to send it. And that brought up some other emotions inside of me. Like, it felt like I was there with you, right? So now I feel closer to you in that particular period of time in my life. And for our listeners, I'd love for you to imagine sitting in something like that for 35 or 40 minutes with another man. You could do this with your romantic partner too. Just hold that space and ask those curious questions. So, Bri, for you, just in a quick recap, what was that like for you, the difference between telling the story from the head space and then telling it from the emotion-based space? I
mean, I reconnected to what I was feeling in the moment. The facts are what the facts are. Like, I wrote an email. I didn't hear from my co-founders but the trajectory of like anger to action. And what I didn't realize, and this is something I've thought about many times, this moment is something I've thought about many times, is how much in that moment it upset me that I wasn't getting a response and not being heard. That's not something I've explored. I've really seen before. So even for me that have thought through this a lot and felt through this a lot, that was something fairly new.
Boom. Yeah, and you're a really reflective guy. You've thought through a lot of things. That's the power of these exercises, is they give you an opportunity to, explore new avenues, have new awakenings. Those questions you asked me before about, like when I got my DUI and have I ever told my parents and why did I choose to tell them? These are questions I haven't been asked before. So these exercises, these games are a beautiful way to go deeper with one another, to establish rapport, to go quicker, to build better bonds. One of the things that we hear consistently over and over again when we ask the men in our mastermind, like, what is so powerful about this space? Guys will say, it's like, I've known men for 10 years, 20 years of my life, but I feel like you guys who I've known for 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, I feel closer to you. I can tell you things. I know things about you. You know things about me that I haven't told these guys who are in my life for 20 years. And a big part of that is being able to set the space to go through exercises like this.
And here's what's really cool about that. I've heard other guys say that they've gone through an exercise like this and they've practiced the role that you were playing, Dominic, with that archaeologist, that guide, that the person asking the questions, holding the space. When they got good at that, practicing it within our group, they've taken it back to some of their friends they've had for 20 years. Yes. And they're having different conversations. And they're starting to have a new relationship with those old friends they've had for 20 plus years. That's been true in my life as well.
That's where you become a leader. When we talk about like 10 million men, the way that we do that is like the guys who are here, who come first and then learn this stuff, then can bring it to the men in their lives who need to be guided, who need a little bit of a breadcrumb to open up. These are the tips, the skills, the games that you can do to bring a guy on the path.
And Dominic has a lot of experience doing this. And so the guiding role that he played is not something that will feel natural on day one.
True.
It's something that takes him, and we've been doing, this is something that we've been practicing for 2.5+ years every week.
Right on.
So we've got a lot of reps in that space. And that's why the practice is important, because if you went to a friend and just said, I'm going to repeat the questions that Dominic asked Brian, it's going to feel really strange. And I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but it'll feel weird. That's
right. And don't let that stop you. Be ready to play the game, be ready for it to be messy. But those 3 games, again, the exercises are the most interesting man in the world exercise, the making your movie, and then your defining moment. And all of that's going to be outlined in the show notes. All right, fellas, you know what time it is. It's time to take action on which one of these exercises that you're going to be bringing to the groups of men that you're a part of, to the teams that you lead, or hell, you can even take one of these exercises into your family to have a few laughs with each other, or to go deeper, to break up the monotony, maybe to take a night off of Netflix for once. I've put all of the instructions and the exercises in painstaking detail in the show notes so you can copy, paste it, print it out, and lead your men, your teams, your families in one of these trust building exercises. And if you're feeling particularly grateful for this contribution to whatever group you're bringing it to, the best way you can let us know is by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, and point to this episode in particular. If this was one that you really enjoyed, leaving a rating and review, and in the subject line, pointing to this episode so others can find it.